I learned something important the day I came home. People who break concrete without permission usually forget there's a paper trail buried underneath it. The smell hit me before I even killed the engine. Fresh asphalt, wet concrete, that sharp chemical bite hanging in the cool morning air after a night of rain. That IT wasn't coming from the county road, that IT was coming from my driveway. That I sat there with both hands still resting on the steering wheel, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. The windshield wipers swept one last time across the glass, revealing a sight that didn't make sense. My driveway had been cut completely in half, that a trench nearly 4 feet wide stretched from one edge of my property to the other, like someone had taken a giant knife and sliced through 20 years of memories. Chunks of broken concrete lay scattered across the grass. Orange safety cones stood in a crooked line. Muddy tire tracks from an excavator crossed the lawn my father used to mow every Saturday morning without fail. And standing beside the open trench was a woman wearing a white blazer that somehow looked perfectly clean despite all the mud around her. Vanessa Whitmore, HOA president, real estate agent, professional expert at smiling while making your life worse. She folded her arms the second she noticed my truck rolling toward the house. "Welcome home," she called, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "We've fixed your illegal driveway." Illegal. That single word hung in the damp air longer than the smell of asphalt. That I stepped out slowly, my boots sinking slightly into the wet gravel that used to connect my garage to the county road. The cold wind carried the distant hum of construction equipment somewhere deeper inside the subdivision. But here everything had gone strangely quiet. Almost like everyone was waiting to see what I would do. What would you do if you came home and found someone had cut your property apart while you were gone? Because I can promise you one thing. My first instinct wasn't anger. It was confusion. My name is Ethan Caldwell. I'm 42 years old, and I design transportation infrastructure for a living. Roads, drainage systems, access easements, utility crossings. I've spent nearly 2 decades solving problems most people never even notice unless something goes wrong. Concrete tells stories. So do excavator tracks. And within 5 seconds of looking at that trench, I realized something Vanessa hadn't. This wasn't just my driveway anymore. Whatever crew she hired had cut much deeper than concrete. "You should thank the HOA," she continued, walking closer in expensive leather boots that probably cost more than my monthly truck payment. "The board voted unanimously. Your old entrance didn't meet community standards." Community standards. Funny phrase. My driveway had been there since 1986. Long before the subdivision existed. Long before anyone had ever heard the name Willow Creek Estates. Long before Vanessa Whitmore discovered the intoxicating feeling of telling other people how to live. I looked down into the trench. Rainwater had already started pooling near the bottom. A section of blue utility marking paint ran across one side before disappearing beneath freshly disturbed soil. Then I saw it. A drainage pipe. Not the new plastic pipe sticking out of the excavation. The older concrete line underneath. Half exposed. Half cracked. My stomach tightened. Whoever dug this hadn't just removed my driveway. They had crossed directly into protected county drainage infrastructure. The metallic taste of adrenaline crept into my mouth. Vanessa mistook my silence for defeat. She smiled wider. "We'll send you the invoice this afternoon," she said. "You're responsible for the improvements." I nodded once. No argument. No shouting. No threats. People like Vanessa always expect a fight because fights create distractions. Paperwork doesn't. I reached into my truck, picked up my duffel bag, and walked past her without another word. Behind me, I heard one of the neighbors whisper, "Guess he finally knows who's in charge." They had no idea what I had already noticed. Because buried beneath that broken driveway wasn't just concrete. It was a mistake so expensive that before this story was over, someone from the county would stand exactly where Vanessa was standing now and ask the only question that actually mattered. "Where's your permit?" Most people think a driveway is just a strip of concrete that gets you from the road to your garage. My father taught me that it was something else entirely. It was the first promise a homeowner makes to himself, that no matter what happened outside the property line, this path always led home. I grew up watching that driveway take shape one Saturday at a time. Back then it wasn't concrete, just packed limestone and tire tracks running through red Texas soil. Every spring rain carved little channels through the gravel, and every summer Dad would drag me outside before sunrise with a shovel over one shoulder and 2 steaming mugs of coffee balanced in one hand. You fix small problems before they become expensive ones, he'd always say. At 12 years old, I thought he was talking about potholes. 20 years later, I realized he was talking about people. After high school, I studied civil engineering, fascinated by the invisible systems most people never noticed. Roads, culverts, drainage channels, retaining walls, easements. I liked solving problems that lasted decades instead of chasing quick fixes that disappeared by next week. Eventually, I joined a transportation engineering firm that worked with several Texas counties on rural infrastructure projects. My days were spent reading construction plans, reviewing permit applications, and walking muddy job sites with surveyors who could somehow spot a grading error from 50 yards away. It wasn't glamorous, but I loved every minute of it. Concrete never lied. Gravity never negotiated. And paperwork always left fingerprints. When my father passed away 7 years ago, he left me the house along with one request. Don't let anybody tell you what this land is worth. He wasn't talking about money. He meant history. Every fence post had a story. Every oak tree had a memory. Even the driveway carried pieces of our family. The concrete slab everyone drove across every day wasn't poured by a subdivision developer. My father and 3 of his closest friends spent an entire holiday weekend finishing it by hand back in 1986. I still remember the smell of wet cement mixing with fresh-cut cedar while my mother handed out sandwiches wrapped in wax paper. That driveway survived hailstorms, flood seasons, droughts, and one pickup truck that slid sideways during an ice storm and somehow missed the porch by less than a foot. It survived everything. Until my neighbors elected Vanessa Whitmore. She moved into Willow Creek Estates about 4 years before I met her. White luxury SUV, designer sunglasses, perfect landscaping, perfect smile, the kind that vanished the second someone disagreed with her. Officially, she sold luxury homes. Unofficially, she treated the HOA like her own private city government. Mailbox color? Her opinion mattered. Holiday decorations? She had thoughts. Grass height? She carried a ruler. I wish I were joking. Most people simply paid the fines because arguing with Vanessa cost more time than writing a check. I didn't pay much attention to any of it. My property sat on the edge of the subdivision, separated by an older county access easement that existed decades before the HOA was created. Legally speaking, my driveway wasn't HOA infrastructure. It never had been. It connected directly to the county road under permits issued long before Willow Creek Estates existed on paper. That technical detail annoyed Vanessa from the moment she learned about it. She visited my house 3 different times during my first year there. First, she suggested replacing the concrete with decorative pavers to match the neighborhood entrance. I declined. Then she wanted HOA landscaping installed along both sides. I declined again. Finally, she asked whether I would consider allowing emergency access through my property for future neighborhood expansion. That answer was even shorter. No. Her smile never disappeared, but her eyes changed. Cold. Calculating. Like someone making a note for later. Standing beside that trench now, watching rainwater disappear into broken concrete, I remembered every one of those conversations. Because this wasn't a spontaneous construction project. It was the final move in a game Vanessa had started years earlier. She thought she had finally forced my property to become part of her neighborhood. What she couldn't possibly know was that every inch of that driveway had already taught me exactly where to look when someone tried rewriting history with an excavator. Vanessa Whitmore did not see herself as a villain. That was the dangerous part. Villains know they're crossing lines. Vanessa believed the lines moved when she pointed at them. 2 weeks before I left town, she came to my door holding a leather folder against her chest like she was delivering a court order. The afternoon sun flashed off her diamond bracelet. Her perfume drifted through the doorway first, sharp and expensive, the kind of smell that tried too hard to prove it belonged somewhere better. Ethan, she said, using that soft voice people use when they have already decided not to listen. The board has reviewed your driveway situation. I looked past her toward the street. 3 houses down. 2 neighbors had slowed their evening walk just enough to pretend they were not listening. My driveway situation, I repeated. She smiled. Your access point is inconsistent with Willow Creek design standards. It creates visual disruption at the entrance corridor. Entrance corridor. That was Vanessa's gift. She could take a normal thing, wrap it in expensive language, and make it sound like a public emergency. I wiped my hands on a shop towel. I had been fixing a loose hinge on the garage door, and the smell of machine oil still clung to my fingers. Vanessa, my driveway predates the HOA. Technically, perhaps. There it was. Technically. A word people use when the law is against them, but confidence is still available. She opened the folder and pulled out a glossy rendering. It showed my driveway widened, edged with stone, lined with HOA-approved shrubs, and marked with a small sign reading Shared Emergency Access. My pulse stayed steady. My jaw did not. This crosses my property, I said. It benefits the community. No. Her smile tightened at the corners. Ethan, refusing reasonable infrastructure improvements could create liability concerns. Whose liability? The association's. For a driveway the association doesn't own? That was when her eyes went flat. For half a second, the mask slipped. No sweetness. No community spirit. Just irritation. That a homeowner had the nerve to understand his own deed. Then the smile came back. We'll revisit this after the next board vote. She turned and walked away, heels clicking down my porch steps like a countdown. I should have taken that more seriously. But life has a way of pulling your attention toward ordinary problems right before extraordinary ones hit. 3 days later, my firm sent me to Oklahoma for an emergency culvert failure on a county road project. Heavy rains had undercut a two-lane bridge, and the local crew needed someone who could review drainage calculations on site. I packed fast. Laptop, work boots, field vest, my father's old tape measure, still scratched from decades of use. Before leaving, I locked the gate at the end of the driveway and asked my sister Claire to check the mail while I was gone. Claire was younger than me by 6 years, sharp as a pocket knife, and twice as suspicious of HOA people. She's going to try something, Claire said over the phone the night before I left. She can send all the letters she wants. I don't mean letters. I remember laughing softly, more tired than amused. What is she going to do? Cut the driveway open? Silence. Then Claire said, "Don't joke like that." The next morning, I drove out before sunrise. The gate chain rattled behind me as I locked it. Mist hung low over the road. The concrete looked gray and clean under my headlights. Whole. Quiet. Mine. By the time I crossed into Oklahoma, Vanessa had already called an emergency HOA meeting. I found that out later. At the time, all I saw were missed calls from Claire 2 days into the job. First 1, then 3, then 8. When I finally stepped away from the job trailer and called her back, the wind was whipping red dust across the site, and rain clouds were stacking black on the horizon. "Ethan," she said, breathless. "There are trucks at your house." My fingers tightened around the phone. "What kind of trucks?" "Construction trucks. A saw truck. One of those little excavators. They cut your lock." Behind her voice, I heard the scream of a concrete saw. High-pitched. Hungry. Metal teeth biting into the path my father built. Then Claire said the sentence that turned the air cold around me. "Vanessa is standing there with a clipboard." I left the project site before the concrete crew even shut down for the day. The entire drive home felt longer than the 400 miles printed on the highway signs. Every hour Claire called with another update. None of them were good. "They're still working. They brought another excavator. They've started laying pipe. Vanessa keeps telling everyone the county approved it." That last sentence stayed with me longer than anything else. Approved it. People throw that word around because they assume nobody ever checks. By the time I pulled into my neighborhood the next morning, the construction crews were gone. The smell wasn't. Fresh asphalt mixed with diesel exhaust lingered in the humid air like smoke after a wildfire. Yellow caution tape fluttered against broken chunks of concrete. Rainwater trickled through the trench, carrying gray cement dust toward the county drainage ditch. I crouched beside the excavation without saying a word. Every cut told me exactly what kind of contractor had done the work. Diamond saw. Clean edge. Compact excavator. Rushed backfill. No erosion control. No temporary drainage barrier. No traffic plates. No utility protection. Professionals. Professionals working for someone who either ignored the rules or believed the rules didn't apply. Claire walked over carrying a cardboard box. "They left this." Inside sat a thick, white envelope with the HOA logo printed across the front. Community Infrastructure Improvement Assessment. Amount due, $18,742.63. Payment required within 15 days. Failure to comply may result in property lien proceedings. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, Because someone had invested real money into making a very expensive mistake. Claire looked at me. You're laughing? I pulled out the invoice. They're billing me for damaging my own property. They say the board voted unanimously. Did they? She nodded. Emergency meeting while you were gone. I kept flipping through the paperwork. Contractor invoices. Drainage improvements. Emergency access conversion. Landscape restoration. One page after another. Everything looked polished. Professional. Almost convincing. Almost. Then I reached the authorization page. There it was. One signature. Vanessa Whitmore. HOA President. Authorized representative. No engineer's seal. No county approval number. No permit reference. Nothing. Just her signature. The metallic taste of adrenaline returned. Claire watched my face carefully. What? I handed her the page. Read the first paragraph. She frowned. Authorized under Community Improvement Authority. No. The line underneath. She read again. Construction within existing HOA jurisdiction. She looked up. So they just certified this driveway belongs to the HOA. It doesn't. I know. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. The breeze pushed loose construction plans across the lawn. Somebody had forgotten to collect them. I bent over and picked one up. Drainage diversion revision, phase 2. My eyes stopped on the north property boundary. Then they moved another 6 inches. Right across the county drainage easement. My heartbeat slowed. Not faster. Slower. That always happened whenever a problem became simple. Someone had redrawn the property line. The survey wasn't just wrong. It had been altered. I unfolded another sheet. Same thing. The boundary markers had magically shifted almost 8 feet onto my land. Enough to make the excavation appear legal. Enough to fool homeowners. Not enough to fool survey records. Claire leaned closer. Is that fake? It's edited. Can they do that? They just did. She looked back toward the trench. So what happens now? I stood up and brushed concrete dust off my jeans. Nothing. She blinked. Nothing. Today. Claire knew me well enough to recognize that tone. It was the same voice Dad used whenever he found termites inside a wall. Quiet. Measured. Already thinking 3 steps ahead. I walked into the garage and opened the old steel filing cabinet my father had bought at a county surplus auction nearly 30 years earlier. The bottom drawer still slid with a rough metallic scrape. Inside were rolled engineering drawings tied with faded blue ribbon. Original driveway plans. 1986 survey. Drainage easement. Documents. County inspection reports. Every permit my father had ever pulled. He never threw paperwork away. Back then I thought he was stubborn. Standing there surrounded by old paper that smelled faintly of dust and machine oil, I realized he had simply understood something most people forgot. Concrete eventually cracks. Ink lasts much longer. As I unrolled the original survey across my workbench, the afternoon sunlight spilled through the garage window onto one small rectangular box printed near the bottom corner. Permit number. Still perfectly legible after nearly 40 years. I smiled for the first time since coming home. Vanessa thought she'd won because she controlled the HOA. She had no idea that the only organization whose opinion mattered was the one whose permit number was sitting right in front of me. By noon, Vanessa had already turned the neighborhood against me. That was her real talent. Not leadership, not organization, narrative control. She could take a broken driveway, a forged map, and an illegal excavation, then somehow package the whole thing as community progress. The first post appeared on the Willow Creek Estates Facebook group before I even finished scanning my father's old permits. Important safety update. That was the headline. Vanessa wrote that the HOA had taken emergency action to correct a hazardous, non-compliant access point at the subdivision entrance. She said my driveway had created drainage concerns, traffic confusion, and potential emergency response delays. Then came the part that made my hands go still over the scanner. Certain homeowners have refused to cooperate with reasonable safety improvements. Certain homeowners. She meant me. By 3 o'clock, the comments were rolling in. Some people asked questions. Most did not. That is how neighborhoods work when fear gets dressed up as politeness. Everyone wants the truth, but nobody wants to be the first person standing too close to it. One man wrote that he had always wondered why my property got special treatment. A woman 2 streets over said she supported Vanessa because property values mattered. Someone else called my driveway an eyesore. I stared at that word. For a long second. Eyesore. My father's concrete. my mother's rose bushes, the path where I learned to ride a bike before crashing into the mailbox and splitting my chin open, reduced to an eyesore by people who had never once stepped onto my porch. Claire wanted me to respond. "Post the permit," she said, standing beside the kitchen counter with her phone in one hand and pure murder in her eyes. "Post the survey. Embarrass her." The smell of burnt coffee filled the room. I had forgotten the pot was still on. No. Why not? Because she wants a public argument. So public arguments make noise. Investigations need silence. Claire hated that answer. I could see it in the way her jaw tightened. But she knew I was right. Vanessa's second move came in the form of a certified letter delivered at 4:18 p.m. The mail carrier looked uncomfortable handing it to me. The envelope felt thick. Expensive paper. Official letterhead. A red stamp across the front. Final notice. Inside, the HOA claimed my refusal to pay the $18,742.63 assessment constituted obstruction of necessary infrastructure work. They gave me 10 days to comply before filing a lien against the property. There was even a line about recovering legal fees. I read it twice. Then I placed it carefully beside the forged construction plan. Paperwork always looks strongest before it collapses. That evening, I walked the property line with my camera. No drama, no confrontation, just boots in wet grass, mosquitoes whining near my ears, and the soft crunch of broken concrete under my soles. I photographed everything. The cut lock lying beside the gate post, the tire tracks across the lawn, the trench depth, the exposed county pipe, the orange utility marks, the absence of erosion fencing, the missing traffic control signage, the fresh scrape on the brass survey marker where someone had tried to pry it loose. That one made me stop. I knelt down and brushed mud away with 2 fingers. My father had paid for those markers after a boundary dispute in 1991. Stainless cap. Surveyor number stamped clean into the metal. Still there. Still legal. Still exactly where it was supposed to be. Vanessa's altered map shifted. The line 8 feet. The marker disagreed. Metal does not care about HOA votes. I took 12 photos from different angles. Then I checked my security cameras. The first clip loaded slowly. 5:12 a.m. A white SUV stopped at my gate. Vanessa stepped out wearing a dark raincoat and holding a clipboard. A contractor walked beside her with bolt cutters. The sound came through tiny speakers on my laptop. Snap. My chain fell. Then Vanessa pointed toward the driveway like she owned the morning. I watched the excavator roll in. I watched the saw truck follow. I watched the first blade bite into the concrete my father had poured. The sound was thin and brutal, like a scream made of stone. Claire stood behind me, silent now. When the clip ended, she whispered, "You have her." I shook my head. "No." Her eyes widened. "What do you mean, no?" I saved the file to 3 different drives. Now I have the beginning. Outside, rain started tapping against the kitchen window. Soft, patient, steady. The kind of rain that finds every crack eventually. The next morning, I didn't call a lawyer. I didn't call the sheriff. And I definitely didn't call Vanessa. Instead, I drove 23 miles to the county records and public works building. It was one of those plain government buildings people barely notice. Brown brick, faded flag, coffee stains on the front steps. The air inside smelled exactly the way every county office in America somehow does. A mixture of old paper, printer toner, floor wax, and burnt coffee that had probably been sitting on a warmer since sunrise. The woman behind the records counter looked up over her glasses. "Morning. Morning. What can I help you find?" I slid one of the construction drawings across the counter. "I'm trying to locate the excavation permit for this project." She glanced down, typed a few numbers into her computer, then typed them again. Nothing. Contractor name? I gave it to her. More typing. Still nothing. Subdivision. Willow Creek Estates. She searched a third database. Her expression changed just enough for me to notice. "I'm not finding an active excavation permit." I figured. "You expecting one?" I was hoping there wouldn't be. That answer earned me a curious look. She picked up the phone. "Tom, can you come up front for a minute?" A man in his late 50s walked out of the back office carrying a yellow legal pad. His boots left faint dust prints across the tile floor, and the reflective stripes on his work jacket told me he spent more time outside than behind a desk. "You Ethan Caldwell?" "I am." He smiled. "I've seen your drainage reports. Good work on the East Creek project." I recognized him then. Tom Reynolds. County Public Works Supervisor. We'd crossed paths years earlier during a flood mitigation project. What brings you in? I spread the plans across the counter. They excavated my driveway while I was out of town. He leaned closer. County Road. Private driveway connected to County Road 12. Permit number? I can't find one. Neither could he. Tom disappeared into another office for almost 10 minutes. When he returned, he was holding a printed permit log. Blank. No excavation authorization. No utility clearance. No drainage review. No traffic control application. Nothing. He tapped the paper once with his finger. If they dug where I think they dug, they crossed a county drainage easement. His eyebrows lifted. You already know. I designed enough drainage systems to recognize one. He nodded slowly. Come with me. 5 minutes later, we were standing over a large digital county map displayed on a planning monitor. Property lines. Utility corridors. Storm drainage. Every easement layered together like transparent sheets. Tom entered my address. Then the subdivision. The screen zoomed in. There. He pointed directly at the trench location. Blue shading crossed the exact spot where Vanessa's contractor had excavated. County storm drainage easement. Protected infrastructure. Authorization required. Tom looked at me. Who approved this work? I was hoping you'd tell me. He gave a short laugh. I can tell you who didn't. He printed 3 maps. Stamped each one with the county seal. Then reached for another phone. Linda. A woman's voice answered through the speaker. Yeah. I need to know if anyone issued an emergency authorization for Willow Creek. Estates this week. Pause. Keyboard clicks. No. You sure? I'm looking at every permit issued this month. Tom thanked her and hung up. Silence settled over the office. The kind of silence that only exists after everyone realizes the problem is much bigger than they first assumed. He looked at the altered survey I had brought, then at the official county map, then back again. They moved the property boundary. About 8 feet. That's not a drafting mistake. No, it's intentional. For the first time since I walked through those doors, Tom stopped looking at me like another homeowner with a neighborhood dispute. Now he looked at the plans the way an investigator looks at evidence. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small inspection request form. I think we need to visit your property. I kept my voice even. When he checked his watch. This afternoon. As he signed the inspection order, I noticed one sentence printed across the bottom of the page. Unauthorized work affecting county infrastructure is subject to immediate field investigation. I folded the copy carefully and slipped it into my folder beside my father's original permit. One document had been signed in 1986. The other had been signed less than 30 seconds ago. Together, they were about to become the 2 most expensive pieces of paper Vanessa Whitmore had ever ignored. Tom Reynolds arrived at 2:37 p.m. in a white county pickup with mud on the tires and a yellow beacon light mounted on top. Vanessa arrived 3 minutes later in her spotless white SUV. That told me everything. Somebody at the HOA had seen the county truck turn onto our street and called her before Tom even parked. I was standing beside the trench with my folder under one arm when Vanessa stepped out, sunglasses on, phone in hand, smile already loaded. Ethan, she said, I wish you had contacted the board before escalating this. Tom looked at me. I said nothing. That silence bothered her more than any insult could have. She turned to Tom with practiced warmth. Mr. Reynolds, I believe this is just a minor HOA maintenance matter. We authorized improvements to correct an unsafe access point. Tom crouched near the exposed pipe. The wind moved through the torn caution tape with a dry plastic flutter. Somewhere behind us, a dog barked once and stopped. He brushed mud away from the cracked concrete line. Who cut this? Vanessa's smile stayed in place. Our contractor performed necessary drainage modernization. Tom stood up. Name of contractor? She hesitated. Just half a second. Enough. Bright Path Site Services. Tom wrote it down on his clipboard. Permit number? The street went quiet. Even the neighbors watching from their porches seemed to stop breathing. Vanessa tilted her head. Permit. Tom looked at her over the top of his glasses. Excavation permit. Drainage disturbance permit. Right-of-way coordination. Utility clearance. Traffic control plan. Any of those will do. Her mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. This was on HOA property. Tom turned and pointed at the brass survey marker still half buried in the wet grass. That says otherwise. Vanessa glanced at the marker like it had personally betrayed her. Then she reached into her leather folder and pulled out the altered map. We have documentation showing the association boundary includes this access corridor. Tom took the paper. Read it. Then handed it back. No, ma'am. You have a drawing. He opened his own folder and unfolded the official county map. This is documentation. I watched her face change. Not collapse. Not yet. Just tighten. The first small crack in expensive porcelain. Tom placed a small orange inspection flag at the edge of the trench. Then another beside the exposed pipe. Then another near the missing erosion barrier. Each flag snapped in the wind like a quiet accusation. Until further notice, he said, all work here is stopped. Vanessa straightened. You can't shut down HOA property improvements. Tom looked at the trench, then at her. I just did. That was the first time I saw fear move behind her eyes. Not guilt. Fear. Guilt requires a conscience. Fear only requires consequences. Her phone started ringing. She glanced at the screen and ignored it. Tom continued writing. Unauthorized excavation within county drainage easement. Damage to protected stormwater. Infrastructure. Failure to obtain permits. Possible falsification of site documents. Falsification. Vanessa snapped. That's a serious accusation. Yes, ma'am. His pen kept moving. It is. The contractor truck pulled up 20 minutes later. A man in a gray work shirt climbed out looking like he had swallowed a handful of nails. His name was Dale Porter, owner of Bright Path Site Services, according to the logo on his door. Tom asked him one question. Did you request county clearance before cutting this driveway? Dale looked at Vanessa. Vanessa looked at him like she could control his answer by force. Dale chose survival. We were told it was already approved. By who? His eyes shifted again. Mrs. Whitmore. The wind pushed the smell of wet concrete between us. Vanessa's face went pale under her makeup. Dale reached into his truck and pulled out a printed work order. I could see her signature from where I stood. There it was again. Vanessa Whitmore. Authorized representative. Tom took the page. Then he looked at me. For the first time all day, I let myself breathe. Because the story had finally changed. That morning, Vanessa had been telling the neighborhood I was the problem. By sunset, the county was holding her signature on the order that proved exactly who had cut open my driveway. News travels through a neighborhood faster than rainwater finds a storm drain. By the next morning, nobody was talking about my driveway anymore. They were talking about the county truck parked in front of Vanessa's house. I watched from my porch with a mug of black coffee warming my hands. The air still carried the damp smell of broken concrete, but another sound had replaced the excavators. Whispers. Front doors opening. Curtains moving. People who had spent years ignoring HOA meetings suddenly found reasons to walk their dogs past my property. At exactly 9 o'clock, another county vehicle rolled onto the street. This one wasn't from Public Works. It belonged to code compliance. 2 inspectors climbed out carrying cameras, measuring wheels, and thick binders. Tom nodded toward me before walking over to greet them. We're documenting everything today. Vanessa marched across the street before either inspector reached the trench. This has gone far enough. Nobody answered. One inspector photographed the exposed drainage pipe. Another measured the excavation. Tom compared the altered survey against the official county plat. Every page they turned seemed to erase another piece of Vanessa's confidence. She kept trying to interrupt. You don't understand the full context. The board approved this. We acted in good faith. Tom never raised his voice. Good faith doesn't replace permits. That sentence landed harder than any accusation. By lunchtime, the contractor had returned with 3 employees. Not to keep working, to answer questions. Dale Porter looked exhausted. His boots were still covered with dried concrete dust from the previous week. One of the inspectors asked him to identify everyone who attended the planning meeting before construction. Dale sighed. There were 5 of us. Names. He listed each employee. Then he stopped. And Mrs. Whitmore. What instructions did she give? Dale rubbed the back of his neck. She said the county paperwork had already been handled. Did you verify that? I asked. And she told me not to worry about it. Silence settled over the group. One inspector made another note. Another photographed Vanessa's signed work authorization beside the altered property map. The 2 documents looked harmless sitting on the folding table, until you realized they contradicted every official county record. Vanessa folded her arms. He's lying to protect himself. Dale looked directly at her. No, ma'am. It was the first time I had ever heard him disagree with her. I've got the emails. Every head turned. The emails? Dale nodded slowly. I save every job file. He unlocked his phone, scrolled for several seconds, then opened an email thread. The inspector leaned closer. So this came before excavation? Yes. Read the highlighted section. Dale cleared his throat. Proceed immediately. County approval is already secured. Delay is unnecessary. Homeowner consent is not required because the association has jurisdiction over the access corridor. Nobody spoke. The only sound came from the breeze rattling the loose caution tape across the trench. Tom held out his hand. May I? Dale forwarded the email without hesitation. Timestamp. Sender. Attachments. Everything. Vanessa finally realized what was happening. Not a neighborhood disagreement. Not an HOA dispute. An evidence collection. She reached for her phone. I need to call our attorney. Tom shrugged. You're welcome to. She dialed immediately. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. I couldn't hear the words. I didn't need to. Her posture changed. Her shoulders dropped. The color drained from her face. She ended the call without another argument. Later, Tom quietly walked over to where I was standing. They're requesting a formal restoration estimate. From me. From an independent engineer. I smiled. I know a few. He laughed for the first time since this started. I figured you might. As the county vehicles pulled away that afternoon, orange inspection flags remained planted beside the trench. Small pieces of plastic. Barely noticeable. Yet somehow they carried more authority than every HOA letter Vanessa had ever mailed. Because those little flags marked something far more important than damaged concrete. They marked the exact place where her story had stopped and the official record had begun. Vanessa resigned on a Thursday. Not during a public meeting. Not with an apology. Not with one of those polished speeches about needing to spend more time with family. She resigned by email at 6:13 in the morning, while the rest of the neighborhood was still asleep and the sprinklers were hissing across lawns she used to patrol like a prison yard. By then, the county had issued its findings. Unauthorized excavation. Damage to protected drainage infrastructure. Failure to obtain permits. Use of altered site documents. Improper assessment against a private homeowner. Every line was dry, official, and absolutely devastating. That was the beautiful thing about government language. It did not need drama. It just needed facts. The HOA was ordered to pay for full restoration of my driveway, repair the damaged county drainage line, reimburse inspection costs, and suspend all assessments connected to the project. Bright Path paid its own fine. Vanessa was referred for further review. Nobody said the word fraud out loud at first. They didn't have to. You could smell it in the silence. The same neighbors who had called my driveway an eyesore now walked past my house, staring very hard at their shoes. One man stopped by with banana bread from his wife and an apology that sounded like it had been dragged across broken glass. Claire laughed about that for 3 days. The repair crew arrived the following Monday. This time, they came with permits taped inside the truck window. I checked. Twice. The sound of saws returned, but it felt different now. Clean. Legal. Accountable. They removed the bad pipe, rebuilt the drainage crossing, compacted the base properly, and poured the new concrete under county inspection. Steam rose from the fresh slab in the morning sun. The wet cement smelled exactly like childhood. For a moment, I could almost hear Dad behind me. You fix small problems before they become expensive ones. By sunset, the driveway was whole again. Better than before. Stronger. Stamped at the edge with a small brass marker showing the county permit number. I knelt beside the old stone my father had set near the entrance in 1986. The excavation crew had knocked it loose, but it had not broken. I put it back with both hands. Same place. Same angle. Same stubborn little piece of history. 2 weeks later, Vanessa drove past in her white SUV. No HOA placard. No board sticker. No smug wave. Just both hands on the wheel and her eyes locked straight ahead. I didn't wave either. Justice does not always need applause. Sometimes it looks like fresh concrete curing in the sun. Sometimes it sounds like a county inspector closing a file. Sometimes it is one sentence on official letterhead that costs a bully everything she thought she controlled. As for the HOA, they elected a retired schoolteacher named Margaret Ellis as interim president. Her first action was canceling every unpaid fine Vanessa had issued without proper review. Her second was removing the phrase community standards from 3 separate forms. Smart woman. A month after everything. Ended, I installed a small metal sign beside the driveway. Nothing flashy. Black letters. White background. Private drive. Permit required. Claire said it was petty. Maybe it was. But every time the evening light hits that sign and the gravel at the shoulder glows gold, I think about Vanessa standing over that open trench, smiling like she had finally won. She cut open my driveway while I was away. Then the county asked for her permit. And that was the moment her whole little kingdom cracked wider than the concrete.